Wenn die reinwollen, die rauswollen, nicht rauslassen, dann können die rauswollen, die reinwollen, nicht reinlassen. What would you think if you came across this sentence in German? If you don't understand how that sentence works or even how you're supposed to figure it out, this video will lay it all out straight for you. Today we're taking a deep dive into relative pronouns and relative clauses in German. If you would like to practice these relative clauses and pronouns for yourself, you should consider becoming a member of my Deutschlerner Club. Members of that club will get access to extra materials to go with every lesson that I upload. The examples in the worksheets aren't nearly as complicated as the ones at the end of this video, but they will definitely help you master the concepts of relative pronouns and clauses. Click the link in the description and get started today. Relative pronouns are used at the beginning of a type of dependent clause called a relative clause. This causes the word order to get all wonky. If you're familiar with my lesson about subordinating conjunctions, you'll already be aware of these word order rules. If not, I'll remind you of the parts that affect the relative clauses today, but also you should totally go check out that other video when you get done with this one. Normally when people think of pronouns, they think of words like he, she, they, we, I, etc. Relative pronouns in English, however, can generally be used as that, who, or which. In German, we still have those pesky grammatical genders and cases to worry about. Depending on how the relative pronoun is being used, you can use a ton of different versions of these pronouns. There are three general rules for using relative pronouns in German. The relative pronoun must match the gender of the noun to which it refers. Masculine nouns require masculine pronouns, and feminine uses feminine, etc. The relative pronoun will also use the grammatical case in which it is used within its own clause, regardless of how it was used in the main clause. In other words, if the relative pronoun is the indirect object of the relative clause, it uses the dative case. If it's the subject of that clause, it uses the nominative case. Number 3, the conjugated verb in the relative clause will appear at the end of the clause. You may be used to this from subordinate clauses. Put all of the other elements in their usual places throughout the clause, and then put the conjugated verb at the very end. Let's take a look at a few examples to see how this works. Der Mann, der das Auto verkauft, bringt mir den Schlüssel. The man who is selling the car brings me the key. Der Mann, den ich gerade getroffen habe, bringt mir den Schlüssel. The man whom I just met brings me the key. Der Mann, dem ich das Geld gegeben habe, bringt mir den Schlüssel. The man whom I gave the money brings me the key. Der Mann, dessen Auto ich gekauft habe, bringt mir den Schlüssel. The man whose car I bought brings me the key. In each of those sentences, the relative clause refers to the man at the beginning of each sentence. Each of them have their own form, however, because the case in which the relative pronoun is used in each sentence is different. The first sentence used the relative pronoun in the nominative case as the subject of that clause. You can split the sentence into two parts to see how the relative pronoun is being used. Der Mann bringt mir den Schlüssel. The man brings me the key. This part is the same for all of the examples. Der Mann verkauft das Auto. The man is selling the car. As you can see, der Mann is written in both of those sentences. That's how we can tell that we need the nominative case when we put them back together. Simply remove the word Mann from behind the article and use that article as a sort of pronoun. Der Mann, der das Auto verkauft, bringt mir den Schlüssel. The man who is selling the car brings me the key. What about the second example? How did we end up with den instead of der? It's a simple process. Split the sentence into two parts again and see how the relative pronoun is being used in the relative clause. Der Mann bringt mir den Schlüssel. The man brings me the key. Ich habe den Mann gerade getroffen. I just met the man. Again, Mann shows up in both sentences, but this time I used den Mann in the second one. This is because in that sentence, it's the direct object. He is the one that I met. I am the one acting in that sentence, so we had to use the man in a different case. Again, we removed the word Mann, and since den Mann is not at the beginning of our example sentence, we have to move that to the beginning of the clause. This makes our full sentence, Der Mann, den ich gerade getroffen habe, bringt mir den Schlüssel. The man, whom I just met, brings me the key. The third sentence uses the dative case, because the man is the indirect object of that clause, the one receiving the direct object, the money. The split version would be, Der Mann bringt mir den Schlüssel. The man brings me the key. Ich habe dem Mann das Geld gegeben. I gave the man the money. We use the same logic as before in this sentence. The man in the second sentence is used in the dative case, so we use the dative version of the relative pronoun. Just move the article to the front of the clause, remove the noun, and move the conjugated verb to the end of the clause. Der Mann, dem ich das Geld gegeben habe, bringt mir den Schlüssel. The man, whom I gave the money, brings me the key. In the last example, I used a word that you have probably never seen in all of your German learning so far. Dessen. And that's the weirdness of the genitive case. I'll show you a full chart of the relative clauses in a bit, but let's take a look at how this sentence breaks apart first. Der Mann bringt mir den Schlüssel. The man brings me the key. Ich habe das Auto des Mannes gekauft. I bought the man's car. This time we used des Mannes, which is used in the genitive case to show the person to whom the car belongs. Since we're still talking about the word Mann, we have to find a way to put the article at the front of the relative clause. But des is only ever used in front of a noun when there is another noun in front of that one. To avoid this problem, we use a word that resembles the genitive question word wessen, but this isn't a question. This is how we ended up with dessen. Der Mann, dessen Auto ich gekauft habe, bringt mir den Schlüssel. The man, whose car I bought, brings me the key. All of the examples that I've given so far are just for masculine nouns. For a quick overview of all of the relative pronouns for all of the genders and all of the cases, let's turn to our chart. As you can see, this chart is incredibly similar to that of the definite articles, or der words. The only parts that are different are the dative plural, which is denen instead of den, and all of the genitive ones, which essentially just add an extra syllable to the usual des and der to become dessen and deren. A quick review of the rules, and then we'll take a look at a few more examples to give you some tips on how to use these pronouns like a pro. The relative pronoun must match the gender of the noun to which it refers. The relative pronoun will use the grammatical case in which it is used within its own clause regardless of how it's used in the main clause. The conjugated verb in the relative clause will appear at the end of the clause. Again, the easiest way to see how we chose which case to use with the relative clause is to split the sentence in half and see how the noun that we are replacing would be used in that sentence. For that reason, I will show you two parts first and then show you the sentence together with the relative pronoun and clause. Ich habe eine Frau getroffen. I met a woman. Die Frau fährt einen Ferrari. The woman drives a Ferrari. Ich habe eine Frau, die einen Ferrari fährt, getroffen. I met a woman who drives a Ferrari. The woman is the subject of the sentence that becomes the relative clause, so we use the nominative case relative pronoun die. Ich gehe heute Abend ins Kino mit einer Frau. I am going to the movie theater this evening with a woman. Ich habe die Frau gestern getroffen. I met the woman yesterday. Ich gehe heute Abend ins Kino mit einer Frau, die ich gestern getroffen habe. I am going to the movie theater this evening with a woman whom I met yesterday. In this sentence, the woman is the direct object of the sentence that becomes the relative clause, so we use the accusative case pronoun die. Du musst diese Frau treffen. You have to meet this woman. Ich gehe mit der Frau ins Kino. I am going to the movie theater with the woman. Du musst diese Frau, mit der ich ins Kino gehe, treffen. You have to meet this woman with whom I am going to the movie theater. The woman is in the dative case in this sentence, as she is the object of the dative preposition. When you use a preposition with a relative clause, you simply move the preposition to the spot before the relative pronoun. It is one of the only times that you will see a relative pronoun used in a position other than the very first word in a relative clause. Die Frau ist nicht meine Freundin. The woman is not my girlfriend. Ich kaufe die Kinokarten der Frau. I am buying the woman's movie tickets. Die Frau, deren Kinokarten ich kaufe, ist nicht meine Freundin. The woman, whose movie tickets I am buying, is not my girlfriend. Again, this one is a little bit confusing because of the possessive form shown with the genitive case cannot be used in the same order that it was before when used as a relative pronoun. So instead of die Kinokarten der Frau, we say deren Kinokarten. In English, it's pretty common to skip a relative pronoun and simply pretend that it's there. For example, the book I like is sold out. This could have been written as the book that I like is sold out, and that would have been a relative pronoun. In German, you have to have the relative pronoun and you can't skip over it. Das Buch, das ich mag, ist ausverkauft. The book that I like is sold out. In English, we differentiate between people and inanimate objects by using who, whom, and whose for people and that or which for non-people. In German, you simply use words that are from that chart that I showed you before, which are basically the same as the definite articles, with a few exceptions. The man who threw the ball is the same man who caught the ball. Der Mann, der den Ball geworfen hat, ist derselbe Mann, der den Ball gefangen hat. In order to understand the sentence that I showed you at the beginning of this video, we need to understand the concept of stacking relative clauses. This is essentially when you have a relative clause that also has a relative clause attached to it. Let's start with some simple examples and kind of work our way towards something more complex. Die Frau, die einen Ferrari, der in den 70ern gebaut wurde, fährt, ist nicht meine Freundin. The woman who drives a Ferrari that was built in the 70s is not my girlfriend. Here we essentially have three sentences all pushed together. The first one is the main sentence and therefore is the main clause. Die Frau ist nicht meine Freundin. The woman is not my girlfriend. The second and third sentences describe two of the other parts, namely the woman and the Ferrari. Die Frau fährt einen Ferrari. The woman drives a Ferrari. Der Ferrari wurde in den 70ern gebaut. The Ferrari was built in the 70s. When you combine them, it becomes Die Frau fährt einen Ferrari, der in den 70ern gebaut wurde. The woman drives a Ferrari that was built in the 70s. Now combine that with the original main clause. Die Frau, die einen Ferrari, der in den 70ern gebaut wurde, fährt, ist nicht meine Freundin. The woman who drives a Ferrari that was built in the 70s is not my girlfriend. You can see that when we nest these relative clauses together in sentences, it can be a bit complicated to figure out where the conjugated verbs go. In the last example, I put the innermost conjugated verb at the end of its clause. The secondary conjugated verb goes at the end of its clause. But because there is another clause inside of that clause, the conjugated verb ends up after the end of the innermost clause. The verb in the main clause is still in the same position it usually is, but it looks odd due to the fact that its location is after those two previously mentioned conjugated verbs. All of that is to say that in the end we have three conjugated verbs in a row: wurde, fährt, and ist. Each of them are conjugated to agree with a different subject: der Ferrari from the third clause, die Frau from the second clause, and die Frau from the main clause. You've seen me use a few examples that include a past participle that is separated from everything else that it has to do with. This is technically the way that this is supposed to be done. However, most Germans would prefer not to split up the verb away from the rest of its clause. For example, das Mädchen, das in meinem Kurs, den ich mittwochs 3 Uhr habe, ist, steht vor der Tür, die von einem Hund, der wild herumläuft, kaputt gemacht wurde. The girl who is in my course that I have on Wednesdays at 3 o'clock is standing in front of the door that was broken by the dog that is running around wildly. There is a confusing bit in the middle of the sentence there where you have three verbs together. It's a bit difficult to figure out which verb belongs to which clause. This is remedied by simply keeping the conjugated verb with the clause to which it belongs. When you do that, it looks like this. Das Mädchen, das in meinem Kurs ist, den ich mittwochs 3 Uhr habe, steht vor der Tür, die von einem Hund, der wild herumläuft, kaputt gemacht wurde. The girl who is in my course that I have on Wednesdays at 3 o'clock is standing in front of the door that was broken by the dog that is running around wildly. You can also say, das Mädchen, das in meinem Kurs ist, den ich mittwochs 3 Uhr habe, steht vor der Tür, die von einem Hund kaputt gemacht wurde, der wild herumläuft. Since a course cannot run around wildly, the context is clear based on the gender and cases that we have here in this sentence. It may look a little bit out of place for German learners, but it's actually perfectly fine. Kinder, die Hunde haben, die glücklich und hilfreich sind glücklicher und hilfreicher. Children who have dogs, who are happy and helpful, are happier and more helpful. In this sentence, I moved the verb haben to be with the clause about dogs instead of its official location between the two sind verbs. If you had it in the official correct spot, it would look like this. Kinder, die Hunde, die glücklich und hilfreich sind glücklicher und hilfreicher. Children who have dogs who are happy and helpful are happier and more helpful. To me, this version is actually more confusing. This is the reason that most people would actually default to the phrasing like I did the first time with haben in the same clause as Hunde. Now let's go back to our original sentence from the beginning of this video and see how we can break it apart to better understand it. Wenn die reinwollen, die rauswollen, nicht rauslassen, dann können die rauswollen, die reinwollen, nicht reinlassen. Let's start by understanding that the words die, when not used in relative clauses, are actually pronouns too. These are demonstrative pronouns, which are exactly like relative pronouns, but you can't use them in relative clauses. You can use them like this, however. Ich mag diese Schuhe. Die kaufe ich. I like these shoes. I'm buying them. The implied subject of all of these clauses is die Menschen or die Fahrgäste. Since this is a kind of PSA for public transportation etiquette, let's use the word Fahrgäste to illustrate this point. Wenn die Fahrgäste, die reinwollen, die Fahrgäste, die rauswollen, nicht rauslassen, dann können die Fahrgäste, die rauswollen, die Fahrgäste, die reinwollen, nicht reinlassen. That takes care of the demonstrative pronouns in this sentence and leaves us only with the relative pronouns to worry about. In order to split this sentence apart like I did my other example sentences, we have to add extra words. Both the direct object and the subjects of all of the clauses are the same noun, die Fahrgäste. So to differentiate between the two groups of Fahrgäste, I'm going to use the adjective anderen to describe the second group of Fahrgäste. Another issue we need to address is the use of the subordinating conjunction wenn, which pushes the conjugated verbs to the middle of the sentence around a comma in simpler sentences. For example, wenn die Fahrgäste die anderen Fahrgäste nicht rauslassen, können die anderen Fahrgäste die Fahrgäste nicht reinlassen. If the passengers don't let the other passengers out, the other passengers can't let the passengers in. This sentence gives us a sort of baseline for the original clause. Instead of die anderen Fahrgäste, however, we need to use a relative clause to describe this group to differentiate them from the other group, and another relative clause to describe the first group. So there are two groups of passengers. Die Fahrgäste, die reinwollen, the passengers who want in, und die Fahrgäste, die rauswollen, the passengers who want out. Now we're ready to finally have an overview of the whole sentence. Wenn die reinwollen, die rauswollen, nicht rauslassen, dann können die rauswollen, die reinwollen, nicht reinlassen. If those who want in don't let those who want out, out, then those who want out can't let those who want in. If you look at only the red parts in these sentences and remove all of the relative clauses, you can see the main sentence. Wenn die nicht rauslassen, dann können die nicht reinlassen. If they don't let them out, then they can't let them in. The first die refers to those who want in, which is why it's followed by die reinwollen, who want in. The second die refers to those who want out, which is why it's followed by die rauswollen. In the clause that starts with dann, the first die refers to those who want out, which is why it's followed by die rauswollen, who want out. The second die refers to those who want in, which is why it's followed by die reinwollen. Surely this is a ridiculous example though, right? And no one would actually say anything like this. Right? Right? Well, just for good measure, let's try a few more ridiculous examples of how these can actually be used to really drive this point home. Die Frau, die ich gestern im Park getroffen habe, hat mir von einem Hund erzählt, als plötzlich ein Kind, dessen Eltern in der Nähe gesessen haben, auf den Hund zugelaufen ist. The woman, whom I met yesterday in the park, told me about a dog when suddenly a child, whose parents were sitting nearby, walked up to the dog. Der Mann, dessen Auto kaputt gegangen war, musste von dem Fahrradfahrer, dem dankbar war, dass ihm half, ins nächste Dorf gefahren werden, wo endlich einen Mechaniker fand, der ihm reparieren konnte, was defekt war, und dessen Arbeit bezahlte, bevor glücklich weiterfahren konnte. The man whose car broke down had to be driven by a bicycle rider, to whom he was thankful that he helped him, into the next village, where he finally found a mechanic who could repair that which was defective and whose work he paid before he could happily drive away. Die Studentin, die in dem Seminar über Architektur teilnahm, in dem auch der Professor unterrichtete, dessen Vorlesung sie besonders interessant fand, besuchte anschließend die Bibliothek, in der sie das Buch fand, das sie suchte, und dessen Inhalt sie ausführlich studierte, um ihre Prüfung bestehen zu können. The student who took part in the seminar about architecture, in which the professor also taught, whose lecture she found especially interesting, finally visited the library in which she found the book that she was searching for, and whose content she studied completely in order to be able to pass her exam. If you would like to practice these relative clauses and pronouns for yourself, you should consider becoming a member of my Deutschlerner Club. Members of that club will get access to extra materials to go with every lesson that I upload. The examples in the worksheets aren't nearly as complicated as the ones at the end of this video, but they will definitely help you master the concepts of relative pronouns and clauses. Click the link in the description and get started today. Das ist alles für heute. Danke fürs Zuschauen. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Tschüss!